Continuing off yesterday's video, I want to clarify, Arknights, at least to me, is an incredibly special gacha game. And I think that if you haven't played Arknights, maybe you've been sitting on the sidelines, perhaps you've played other gacha games, then I personally fully and wholeheartedly recommend Arknights to you. See, in my opinion, it's very difficult for a gacha game to get everything right, and even if it does get some things wrong, I think that the problems with that one wrong instance can really drag down the quality of the rest of the game. For me, I mentioned that the story isn't for me, just simply based on the way it's presented, but even if a game doesn't have a story that I prefer, if we can get everything else right, from the gacha, to the characters, to the style, to the music, to the aesthetic, and to the gameplay, it is still worth playing. And to me, despite me not enjoying the way Arknights presents its story, at least for my own personal tastes, I fully enjoy Arknights. I still think it's one of the best gacha games out there, just because of how well polished it is, and because of how much it offers you. Yesterday, I got onto Arknights and I started a brand new account. I did a 10 pull. I managed to get Texas, Golden Glow, and I don't understand what either one of them do. Texas, I vaguely used Golden Glow, I just like because she's cute. And I'm continuing on to the game, and in my personal opinion, I do think that for newer players especially, the early stages of Arknights are really fun. Not necessarily because they're super easy, but because the rewards you get that you then can put onto banners in terms of doing pulls is really nice. Arknights is essentially guaranteeing you something nice within the first 10 rolls, even if it's something you already have later on in the game. For example, it could be a duplicate much later on. The fact of the matter being that you can get something decent in the first 10 pulls, even if it may not be the limited banner unit you want, is still really nice. I think that it only becomes an issue later on when you're getting duplicates constantly, but even then those duplicates do help to some small degree. As such, for me and my new accounts, the early stages of the game have been rather fun. I have a character who I really like, I have designs that I like, and I can still really experience a lot of the early stages. And this time I'm taking a much more different approach to the story. I'm deciding to learn, I'm deciding to pay attention to different mechanics and be a lot better at the game. That way, if I do create content for the game in the future, I'm a bit more knowledgeable on it than I previously was. With that being said, once again, Arknights gets a lot of other things right. It's not just the concept of the early game stages. You have gameplay that both can be, at least in the early stages, really easy, but one that also is really difficult later on. Arknights is essentially a game that has the actual thought process put into it to make you require not necessarily certain units, but certain types. Because of the variation in units that you're getting and the specific abilities that they have and how they support or do things for your team, Arknights is actually really good at focusing down on making you use or learn about or specifically build certain types. You may get into a stage that doesn't allow you to use your ranged units or specific casters or individuals who may want to go into specific tiles. And an example is if you built only guards or you built only vanguards, you may run into a situation that really punishes and diminishes your effectiveness for that stage. So Arknights gives you a bunch of units, but it also says, hey, you're going to need to build a bunch of these units, specifically basically a full team, just in case you can't use these 2 units. You're gonna have some really good units in the game. You're gonna have some great banners that you can really roll on and dedicate your time to. You have example, you have Silver Ash at his skill 2, I believe, or maybe skill 3, I don't know. You have Surtur. And these are great units, don't get me wrong, and they're powerful, but even if you just get one of them, they're not going to clear the game for you, because there will be content that essentially forces you out of using them, and I think that's a great idea. This is all without mentioning events and extremely difficult content later on. If an individual who likes difficult content, who likes having to think and plan out and optimize, I think Arknights really does give you that opportunity, because it does make you think about, okay, the placement of your team, okay, who's supporting who, okay, in this instance, who's going to be the best healer or medic to bring onto this team, okay, I want to bring out a support or anyone who can essentially do something for every other teammate. What are the passives like? And because every unit doesn't just work for themselves, you have to consider, okay, in some instances you may like, I don't know, I'll use Silver Ash as an example. You could like him because he does really high damage with his skill 3. Once again, I think it's a skill 3. I don't know, let me check. Yes, it's a skill 3. You may like him because of the high damage output of his skill 3. However, you may also in some instances prefer his skill 2, just because it somewhat increases his survivability. And the passive regeneration and assistant does mean that you could essentially lower or have him on lower priority for getting a healer dedicated to helping him out. And in my opinion, that's great. Sure, units will have the strongest damage output abilities, but they will also have other supportive abilities. You have units who are really niche and unique, he's one of them. He is an individual who does damage your other teammates, but can, if they survive, buff them. And I'm aware there's a lot more nuance to a lot of this than I'm personally explaining, but I think just talking about it on a surface level is better than trying to go super in depth when a lot of individuals may not be paying attention to this point. But I just think that, yes, I've tried Blue Archive, I've tried Counterside, I've tried Art of Gear Fusion, I've tried Honkai and Genshin and so on. But I do think that for the vast majority of the games I've played, Arknights is the one that requires the most mental fortitude to get through. Arknight's story is depressing, the gameplay is a lot harder, and because of that, it requires you to really spread your resources around pretty evenly. It's a game directly about resource management. What are your units doing? What are their levels? What are their skills? What ultimately are you going to do? Who are you promoting first? Who's taking priority for getting onto the field, and in what order do you want? Okay, units are coming. Now, how are you going to stop that? How are you going to prevent yourself from essentially losing? Are you going to wait for them to get to one choke point on the map? That way you can try and put all your powerful units there. But if you do that, you run the risk of multiple powerful enemies coming to one point and demolishing the vast majority of your team that's positioned. Are you going to spread your units around, in which case you have to deal with trying to manage and keep all of them alive at separate points, but that means that no powerful enemies are just clustered into one area. Okay, your casters are out. Now you have a ranged enemy who's attacking them, and because or if they don't have a healer positioned next to them, they're gone. And now you have to worry about, okay, when can you redeploy them and what's the loss like for the rest of the team? There's so many different nuances to this game that I do believe it's one of the more thought-worthy games. However, even if you don't recommend or don't like playing Arknights, here's my other recommendation to you. Please go onto YouTube and just search up the OST, the soundtrack of the game. Arknights has an amazing soundtrack. I think it's a given at this point that if you're playing a gacha game, it doesn't have a good soundtrack, you're obviously not playing a good gacha game. I think music accounts for like 80% of what gacha games are usually recognized by first. An example is, one of the first things I noticed about playing Blue Archive was that menu theme when it was loading up the game. The live 2Ds have nice theme music, so if you're looking at Arknights and it has really good music, I think that's a great sign. Even a game like Genshin Impact has some really good soundtracks in it here and there. I think that gacha games live and die, in my opinion, based on their soundtracks being good, A, and B, the character designs. You can kind of gloss over a lot of other things, but the character designs and the soundtrack have to be good. If you log into Arknights and all you heard was horrible music, then I think a lot of us would be different about the game and have a different opinion. But even the events get nice, exclusive, wonderful soundtracks, and it just gives a whole new vibe and feeling to each new storyline, each new arc you're going on. So, if you're looking for a gacha game, play Arknights. It's free to play friendly, it provides you with a lot of things to do, you do have different opportunities, and in my opinion, it's very easy to pick up and put down. I've never felt pressure to put money into the game, I've never felt pressure to play the game constantly because an event is out. Instead, I pick it up, play what I want, get a character I want, and then put it back down, and I may come back a week later, I may come back a month later. But ultimately, I think among the gacha scene, if you're looking for the most well-rounded game, I'd say Arknights is it. Sure, Genshin has the combat and graphical style, but outside of that, you have a lot of issues with the lack of hard and difficult content that requires you to think more carefully and more heavily. Blue Archive is fun, but I actually recommend Blue Archive on par with Arknights just because Arknights at the moment has a bit more content than Blue Archive towards the end game. But honestly, both are on equal playing fields to me. But tell me your opinion down below. My name is miHoYo. If you've enjoyed this video, leave a like down below, consider subscribing, and I hope to see you next time.